have done with their grad degrees in student affairs. I'm Colleen. I'm co-chair of the Grad Student Network along with Nicole Crozier, who's in our audience today. Feel free to pop into the chat who you are, where you're coming from, what institution you're affiliated with, and maybe what area of student affairs you work in or what you're interested in. And we can just get started here. So I will start. My name's Colleen. I'm a PhD student in higher education at OISE at the University of Toronto. I used to work in the BD School of Business at Simon Fraser University, mostly in academic advising and curriculum. And the last thing I did was co-chair a undergrad program review. And I teach business communication courses. I also have a MEd in post-secondary leadership and a post-bac in counseling and human development. I had to think about that one a little bit. So I just want to welcome all of our panelists. So I'm going to go through, first we have Lisa Higashi. So welcome, Lisa. Thank you for being here. Well, thank you all of our panelists for being here. So Lisa is currently the Director of Student Success at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in British Columbia. She's also worked at the BD School of Business at SFU, the Sauder School of Business at UBC, and Douglas College in a variety of student affairs roles, including student engagement and career development. She's also taught organizational behavior to undergrads at SFU. Lisa has a BA from SFU, and she was a transfer student who came from Douglas College, and she also has an MEd in post-secondary educational leadership. And then we have Susanna. Welcome, Susanna. She's currently the Assistant Director of International Community at Concordia College, Moorhead in Minnesota, where she's also held previous roles related to supporting U.S. underrepresented students. She has a diverse background, having studied and worked in China, the US, and now she's doing her PhD at OISE at the University of Toronto. She's a Bachelor of Arts in Public Relations and Advertising from Hong Kong Baptist University and a Master of Science in Mass Communications from Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. And then we also have Chris. Welcome, Chris. He's currently the Executive Director of Student Affairs. I didn't put the institution. It's Mount Royal in Alberta. Chris has also worked at Canadian International College, BCIT, and Simon Fraser in a wide variety of student affairs roles. He's also taught courses in the Masters of Education program at SFU. His education includes a BA in psychology, same as Lisa actually, an MA in leadership training, justice, and public safety, and a doctorate of education in post-secondary educational leadership. And we also have Mara. Welcome, Mara. So she's currently the Manager of Student Development and Engagement at the BD School of Business at Simon Fraser University. She's also worked at several institutions, including Capilano University in British Columbia, Texas A&M International, and Texas A&M University in a variety of student affairs roles. Her education includes a bachelor's degree in communication and media studies from Texas A&M International, and also a master's in student affairs administration in higher education from Texas A&M. So I thought with this panel, what I was trying to do was get some diversity. So we've got community college, private sector, public sector, America, Canada. We've got a little bit of a variety. I did pull on my network. You'll notice the pattern with the BD School of Business there. But we can always have more panels with other experiences as well, and also the U of T connection with Susanna. So I've done a bit of an intro, but I don't know if there's anything you want to specifically add with your intro, but maybe share a little bit of a story about your career and educational background. And just to make this easier, I'll call on you in the same order that I just introduced you. So Lisa's going to go first.
Thanks, Colleen. Hello, everybody. Nice to see folks here, and also the panel members. Great to see you all here today too. Colleen, I thought you did a great job introducing us and our backgrounds. I guess maybe what I can add to the introduction is more so around how my career in student affairs initiated and sort of developed over the course of the last 10 years for myself. Like Colleen mentioned, because with my undergraduate in psychology, during my undergrad degree, I wasn't necessarily really sure what I wanted to do, where I wanted to be, especially during the last few years or being a senior student. And there's a few, I think, career paths that I was exploring, whether that might be doing PDP, so going into the K-12 system as a teacher, or looking at doing a counseling master's, or going into HR. So it's thinking about different career paths and exploring. It wasn't actually graduating just after a couple of years after the 2008 recession. It was also some industries were a little bit more difficult, I think, to get into than others. And so it wasn't until I was, thinking back at, some of my student assistant roles at Douglas College, where I thought, why not also look at post-secondary? So I think in terms of my undergrad, some of my student experiences working in student affairs really sort of changed the trajectory of where I might have intended to initially go. Once I was a student at Douglas College, then transferred to SFU, and then ended up going back to Douglas College as a professional staff member, working in different capacities, and then which then led to many different aspects of working in higher ed, whether that's student advising with international students, domestic recruitment, and student development and career development as a whole. So. And then I'd say it was about 3 years into my professional career that I thought, I was starting to look for a new challenge. So that was when I thought I'd pursue a master's. So I started looking at a few different options, and with many colleagues also doing the MEd at Simon Fraser University, landed there and met some amazing colleagues, and ended up working at SFU halfway through the program as well. So that's a little bit about sort of the journey and where I've ended up. I'll pass it on to the next person.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. So community college, university, and careers. What did you say? International advising, domestic recruitment. You've kind of done a little bit of everything from the sounds of it. Very cool. All right, Susanna, do you want to tell us a little bit of a story about your education and career?
Sure. Thank you, Colleen, and good to see everyone. Happy Monday. Yeah. Thank you again for the introduction. I think you covered pretty much a lot of my journey. I think mine is also very unconventional in terms of my degree. I mean, I've never had a degree in education until a year ago. I started my PhD study at University of Toronto at OIC for higher education. My undergrad is public relations and advertising in a very unique university setting in China. Is one of the first international school debut with Hong Kong University and the mainland university, but they also use the liberal arts model in the US North American GPA system. So that really is my first eye-opening to learn more about North American education system. So I went on to the US for my graduate degree in communications, and I think it really started my interest in working in higher ed. It was when I started working as a graduate assistant at the university in Illinois, Southern Illinois University at Bristol, working with the Dean's office to develop some of the program and fundraising projects for one of the biggest college on campus. So that really helped me to understand how a university works. And it was good to have that comparison, because the undergraduate school I went to in China is more so considered a private university, but then the one in the US I went to grad school is more state system, public university. So I could see how the organizational structure are different. So when I applied for jobs postgraduate school, and I went to apply for both works in the industry, more so in the advertising and communication area, and also work in higher education. And I landed this job in Minnesota. I started working with underrepresented students in the US. So I think I really learned a lot from that position, as well as someone that did not grow up in North America, and really seeing myself as a minority from a different perspective, and having those cultural experiences and learning about other story for my work. And now that my primary job profile is working with international students from 30 something different countries. So, and I'm sure all the panelists and our audience will share that too with COVID. It really impact our work as a student or as a support person. So yeah, it has been quite a journey. So I'm looking forward to learning from everyone too, and feel free to let us know any questions you might have, and hopefully it's helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, I thank you, Susanna, for sharing that. And I forgot to mention that at the beginning. If you do have questions for the panelists, you can pop them into the chat, or we do have some time for questions at the end as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris. You want to tell us your career and education story?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. And some familiar names that I see as well. So great to see you virtually there, and hope everybody's doing well. Yeah, my journey really starts off as, I think, a little bit like other people, where I never planned a career or an educational plan in anything to do with student affairs. It's funny, I was asked a few years ago in an interview with for a media interview about how do I fit into this student success story, and I made the quintessential mistake of telling them my life story, and so they printed that and not anything else. And one of them being, when I first went in, I was doing thought I was going to get a business degree, and I flunked out of university like you wouldn't have believed, and got to use the different supports. But during that time, I actually lived in housing and got really connected to student affairs in housing, and found this career in housing. I was an RA and worked through that process. And so when I finished my degree, I got the pleasure of working at a private post-secondary for a very niche market, a private post-secondary for international students. And got to work through that experience. And as I was working with many student leaders from diverse backgrounds and trying to create a quality way that we work with our students, I found a leadership master's in leadership program, and got really interested in it and took it. And as I was in it, my connections with other post-secondaries really kind of worked out, and was able to get a job at SFU doing exactly what my master's was in, and really enjoyed it. And as I was working there, for those of you who have ever worked in housing, you get into housing and you do your darndest to try to get out of it eventually. And so I had finally got it out of housing, and I wasn't doing housing anymore. And then with me doing my master's, and as well as working with some leadership, people were like, we need some help in housing. Could you go back there for, and I'm like, 6 months, that's it, 6 months. And 6 years later, and while I was there, and starting to experience a lot of things going on with students, and how do we respond to students in distress to prevent some violence. And so, as many of us, when you work at an institution, sometimes you get offered the opportunity of free education, which makes the pain of graduate studies a little bit less challenging to take. And so got to take my doctorate and started to do that work around a lot of research around behavior intervention teams, which then created more opportunities at SFU, but then an opportunity to take that skill and go and work in the Polytechnic, and got to do that. And during that time, it's given me opportunities to work with people who are in their master's programs and teach in the master's programs, and now overseeing a very large division of student affairs. So I don't want to bore anybody more with my life, but for those of you who, to quote another person in post-secondary leadership, those of you who know Candy Ho, her whole research was about the happenstance and what we do in the student services realm, and to get to the jobs that we're at. And our paths are all unique, but oftentimes there's been some people in our lives that have influenced us along the way, and I definitely have had that. So yeah, and I've had the pleasure of working with some of the people around here today. So yeah, a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of see the thread of discovery for student affairs as you go through and find out more about kind of what's behind the curtain at the universities and colleges. All right, Mara, do you want to share your career and education story?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here. Hi, everyone. My name is Mara. My pronouns are she, her. And a little bit about how I landed into the student affairs realm, and a little bit about my education. So I grew up in Mexico, and I moved to the United States to do my undergraduate and graduate degree. As from, the titles of the different universities I've been, there's, in the United States, there's large state universities, and then some of them have smaller campuses. So my undergraduate was at a smaller campus from the Texas A&M system. And that campus particularly was a Hispanic serving institution. Majority of students were Hispanic, including myself. And the university itself was under-resourced in terms of full-time staff. So they really utilized student employees as a tool to support full-time functions. So I started working as an orientation leader and then as a peer mentor for academic advising. And those roles, because of how under-resourced the university was, that we had very heavy duties in terms of, even though it was a student position, I had really high responsibilities in terms of like access to student data and like helping people register for classes. So that really allowed me to really immerse myself at a really young age into some of these practices. As I started moving forward with my undergraduate degree, and I realized that communications wasn't something that I saw myself in the future, I started getting more heavier involvement in kind of student politics and student activities and things like that. And that really allowed me to be part of strategic planning committees as a student voice and things like that. So that enabled me to figure this out. And in one student travel I did as a representative for student government, the person who drove us studied a master's in student affairs, and that was probably the first person I knew from the university who had done that. And she encouraged me to look into it, so I did, and then I found out that Texas A&M had a really good program, and I'm incredibly privileged that I got in and I was able to get a tuition waiver so I could afford to go to that program, because as an international student, if there's folks in the room who have experienced that or worked with an international student, you know that that can be very expensive. So the program that I took part of was a 2-year program, very immersive. We had to work 30 hours on top of our coursework, and the 30 hours were at a graduate assistantship that was connected with our classroom. So I had the honor to work in multicultural services, and that really helped me figure out my own identity as a Latina woman, but also how like student identity really plays in the student experience. And I also had the opportunity to work in family programs. So families are huge in the United States and potentially a little bit more involved than in Canada. So I'll touch base on that later. But throughout my time, if I could summarize it, I think I've worked heavily in student organizations, orientation, leadership programming, and then a little bit of advising multicultural services here and there. So I would say my experience is heavily more on the student involvement side versus the academic affairs, but I've had the privilege to work with a little bit of both at this time. So moved to Canada almost 4 years ago for various different reasons, and had the privilege to work at Capilano University and now here at the VT School of Business. So really excited that I got to take my degree from different countries and to be able to translate what I learned in my program into my different roles.
Awesome. Thank you, Mara. So I have another question for everyone. We'll just kind of go in the same order. So my next question is really just how did your grad studies impact or change your career? So we're going to start with Lisa, and maybe if you just want to remind us what your grad studies were, like what it was in, and then just how that kind of changed your career and advanced it or shifted it.
Sounds good. So for myself, the master's degree that I completed was the master's in educational leadership with a post-secondary focus at Simon Fraser University. How has it changed? I think so. For me, at the point of application into the program, I was actually still working at Douglas College. And so, I didn't necessarily have the tuition waiver as something that was a consideration at that point. It was more of a, what can I learn from that program that will help me do better in the work that I was doing. So I didn't necessarily have any expectations while I was applying for the program. When I had actually the point that I was accepted to the program, I think it was a couple days later that I was also offered a job at UBC. And so I was also sort of, trying to navigate changing, roles and institutions while also thinking about starting a program. And then, so once I started the program, I was at UBC. So I was at UBC for a year, so halfway through the master's program. And then it was a year in that that I had then applied for a position within the BD School of Business at SFU. I think throughout that time, I was mostly within the student development, student involvement aspect side of things. And I guess what really helped with the program was there was a lot of theory, but it was really the theory to application that helped support the type of work that I was doing throughout the program. And there was aspects of the program that we could apply while we were working. And then I forgot actually how many jobs that I might have switched through that 2-year period. But I guess sort of being open to different opportunities throughout the time. I didn't, I wouldn't have ever imagined that I would have landed now where I am today. And so I think the network that you build, the network and friendships that you build in the program, and the application of the work, and also working on your own research project and sharing a lot of those findings were all, I think really valuable pieces of the program that helped me throughout my career.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. And for anybody who's not aware, the tuition waivers just basically your tuition is free at SFU. I know there's a few universities that either do discounts or waivers. So yeah. So Susanna, how did your grad studies program shift your career or impact?
Yeah, I think has been really great for me to have the experience studying in different educational systems. So I see there's a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences, especially even just the campus itself. They share different cultures and different leadership settings and style. But I think probably all the panelists will agree with me too, like working in student affairs or any work with students, we always wear many hats. So I will agree with Lisa that always take the opportunity to explore the new options, or just to take on some of the projects that might not be necessary in your work profile. Then you might find something you would like to explore next for your career, or even for research or further study. I think that's definitely the reason why I start my study at OIC for my PhD, because I wanted to do a little bit more in-depth research, especially with where we're heading now, and then the value of higher education and how people are looking at and how valuable the degree is, and what's the student experience during those 4 years. So 3 years in some systems could help the student in their future career, and furthermore, like how our society evolve with those skills, and how we doing the student service when we are evolving them, like Mara kind of share too. Some colleges and university, they rely on a lot of students to do some of the full-time work, and is that a good thing, or how do we ensure the quality of that, and training versus learning, how much should we rely on students, and how much could we provide a very meaningful experience in terms of training and learning. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Susanna. And Chris, do you want to share a little bit about how and you have 2 graduate degrees, so if you just want to share kind of what the shifts were in your career for those 2, I guess, points are related to those.
Thanks, Colleen. I like the subtle way of calling me old and that I've had other opportunities, but so I appreciate that it was a much more gentler way of saying it. But yeah, for me, maybe I'll throw in a couple of things that worked out really well for me as well during that time. So for example, when I was at the international school, I didn't have the resources of working with all of the other public schools. And so, but I found that I really needed to work with the leadership development. And so when I was taking my master's program, and to Lisa's point, when you have that that opportunity to do action-based research and actually try to solve a real-world problem, it was funny. I had worked in the area of leadership. I had done that, and an opportunity came up at university at Simon Fraser, and I was specifically hired to develop a leadership development program. And I actually had the ability to shift, and I was 3/4 of the way done my research project, and I shifted it to be what I was doing then. And I actually researched what is the essential elements of a curriculum for a leadership development program. And it was actually through presentations at things like CACUSS and different things that my research got some traction, and therefore started working and meeting people who were doing similar work. And that really benefited to my network of people kind of understanding who I was and what I was doing. And so that same thing happened when I then moved into my doctorate. I was dealing with some really high level serious cases and recognizing the impact it had to the institution. And so started doing that work. And not only did it create, like Lisa was talking about, opportunities at the institution, but as I had been doing presentations at CACUSS and different areas about where my research was going, people had heard about me. And so encouraging me to work with their various organizations or different areas. And so that not only gave me an opportunity within the institution where a new position was created of special projects. Hey, can you do this special project for us? But also then at BCIT, where they were bringing in mental health and student conduct response, which was an element of my research. And so, and then from there with presenting at CACUSS, then it turned into creating subject matter expertise with different people around the country who were doing similar type of work. And so getting into doing some consulting, but even now, for example, sitting on board, looking at behavior intervention in Canada and how do we do it, and being asked to be a part of that. Actually then working with people on their research and their graduate work. And it's been both fulfilling and amazing at the same time. And through that, being asked to do like Student Conduct Institute, and then getting to do research with different faculty members. And I've gotten to do research with my doctoral supervisor in the area of student success in Indigenous student success, which I never would have had that opportunity had I not been able to connect into that research. And so it's really affected me, not only in the opportunities that I've had, but also the people that I've been able to learn from and connect, and where we can share some resource. I just wish I had time now to do all of the research that I want to do and the collaborations that I want to do, and even publish. Like, I've never published my work for my doctorate because you just get active in it. So, but yeah, that's kind of my background. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. And Mara, do you want to share a little bit about how your grad education impacted your career?
And I think for example, for me, it might be a little bit different because I went straight from undergraduate to graduate. So I didn't have that opportunity that a lot of people do to start working in the field a little bit, start discovering what it is, and then applying that into the master's degree. Though I'm really grateful that my master's did have that practical component that allowed me to put what I was learning in the classroom into my work experience. I think for me, it's been really helpful because even though it's been about probably, I think, 5 years since I graduated, I still remember a lot of the things that I was instructed in class and the theories and the research that was part of the program, and I still apply it. So even though, for example, right now I'm in student engagement and that's where I've been for a little bit, sometimes there's things that come up that I can think back into, okay, I was taught this in class and I did some research with that. Or like Lisa said, you have a network of people there. So I have a lot of friends who work in different functional areas. So sometimes I message them and I say, hey, have you encountered this? Like, what have you utilized from like our program that could work with this? And so I think it also provides you with a good network and good skills to really contribute to the field as well. I think before moving to Canada, and to echo a little bit what Chris was saying, you start getting into an area that you really like and you want to start contributing. So you start doing conferences, you start meeting people, you start publishing your work in different blogs and different places that might be helpful. And so I think like the graduate school opportunity has really helped me advance in like skills that I don't know if I would have received otherwise, like maybe with mentorship, maybe with like some really intentional conversations. But I think like the network it provided and the content that I really learned in there is something that I still use. I still go back to my books. I still go back to my notes. They're still relevant. And like the beauty of it is that every job that I've had, I can go back and then figure out how I can apply it to this particular role, to this particular scenario. How does this translate into the student population I work with right now versus the one I worked before? So you really still have that opportunity to reflect on what you've learned throughout your time. So that's how it's impacted me, and I still use it. I'm really grateful for all the knowledge that it provided and the good network that it has given me.
So it sounds like the common threads that are really the network piece and the people that you got to know, whether it was your supervisors or professors or your classmates. And then also the kind of building and expanding your knowledge base to have more kind of knowledge to lean on when you're doing your work. So thank you so much for sharing that. So my next question is for Lisa and Chris. So both of you have taught at university. I know that that might be a goal for some other people. So if you can just share kind of how did you find yourselves in those teaching roles, and how did you find your way there? And do you have any like advice for people who want to do that? And what was your path? Lisa, if you want to go first again.
I don't know if I have great advice on this front in terms of the teaching, because I guess similarly to, stumbling upon the field of student affairs, I felt like I similarly stumbled upon teaching along the way. Actually, it was also, colleagues like you, Colleen, that who after our master's started teaching within the School of Business, as well as some other colleagues. Actually, looking back now, some of my colleagues at Douglas College also made that transition from student affairs and services to teaching. And I mentioned earlier that teaching in the K-12 was something that was of interest earlier on, and so if the opportunity came up, I knew it was something that I had wanted to do. At SFU, though, it was probably through a couple of conversations and sort of ad hoc conversations with folks where, it could have been with our academic director, Stephen Spector, through a hallway conversation where I had mentioned it, or at another meeting where, when an opening came up, he sort of, came to my office and asked if I was interested. And if so, feel free to put in your application. There might be a window of opportunity right now. And so that's sort of how that came about, to be sort of on as a sessional instructor. And this is my 4th semester teaching now. And, of course, teaching on COVID's been a little bit different, and being able to adapt to, in person or online. And it sort of really helped me get I think it's one thing to be in the classroom as a student, but to be an instructor, it opened my eyes to the curricular side of things, and I think actually helped me or continues to help me in my student affairs practice too. So have found a lot of benefit in jumping on that opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you. And Chris, how about you?
Yeah, it's funny. I've done a lot of workshop and guest lecturing in classes, and always never prioritized teaching. And it's something that I've always wanted to do. And so I was very fortunate that when I was doing my doctorate work, there is a program where they have for the master's program, which is a site assistant, where you basically like a TA and supporting that group. And so I had the opportunity to actually serve as the site assistant for an entire cohort, and found that I really enjoyed engaging in dialogue with students in their academic journey, and helping them along that progression, and sharing the knowledge and the experience that I had. And then it was through that with that program, when they were looking at a future year, I had mentioned to, because I had experience with them, working with that group, saying, hey, I would be interested in teaching if there's an opportunity. And it was through there that was given the opportunity, and absolutely loved it, and was really, really enjoyed it. And now I find teaching is really an important part of being in student affairs, to really understand that student experience. That, it's easy to be an armchair administrator and sit on the sidelines and say, well, faculty, you should do this more, or, well, student affairs, you should do this more, or students, you need to experience this. But until you are in that realm and understanding the lived experience of our students and our faculty, I found it really enriched my experience, or my opportunity. The advice that I would have, though, is about expertise. And I think one of the things is that we need to shape what our area of expertise was. So I had a master's degree in leadership, and then I've got my doctorate in higher educational admin, and I had worked in student affairs. So teaching a leadership course in a student affairs master's was that area of expertise that really, really landed. I think of a lot of the people who are wanting to teach in those different areas. There's a lot of people who have a generalized experience or background, but where is that level of expertise that you have? Where do you bring that differing experience? And I think of people like Susanna and Mara, who bring that international and that different lens and that experience, that it is not, the white colonial approach to just bringing into one experience. And so I think that's where, if people are looking to build that, is build your relationship with the people who have the responsibility for the area that you would like to teach, or the program. And what is the area of expertise? What do you bring to enhance the curriculum? And sometimes it works out well because people know you already and know that, but sometimes you have to go out and shop that a little bit and let people know. For example, I've been working with OISE, and how the area of expertise that I have that can bring to, whether it's the master's or the doctoral program that's there. So yeah, that's kind of my background.
So we had a question in the chat just for Lisa, just for anybody who didn't see that, asked what she teaches, and she teaches organizational behavior, a second-year business class at SFUBD School of Business. And just to kind of summarize that, I would say I can kind of hear the three common threads are leveraging your expertise, capitalizing on your network, and also just putting it out there that you want to teach. And my experience was very similar. Part of the reason I did my master's was because I wanted to teach, and I had seen someone else do that before. And so I started putting it out there so that people knew, so that when the opportunity did come up, they knew that I was interested. So then you have that opportunity. So definitely part of the networking piece there. Okay.
Colleen, if I could add one quick thing,
definitely.
Is especially within your own institution, when you are at a role that doesn't have an administrative role within the institution, it's much easier for you to get into teaching, as compared to, for example, I would really like to teach at Mount Royal right now, and it's really not an option for me because I have an administrative function and role at the institution, and it violates some collective agreement rules, and it violates some appropriateness of me teaching a student in that component. And so therefore, that option doesn't exist anymore for me within my institution. So if you, but one of the best ways is within your institution, because that's where they know you. And so my often advice is make sure you start there sooner rather than later, because you won't have that option a little bit later on, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. Definitely important. I know the working with the collective agreements at SFU can also be challenging in terms of getting into the courses, getting into teaching. Okay, so my next question is for Susanna. So you did your undergrad in China, you've been working in higher education in the US, you did your master's in the US, and then, your undergrad was in Hong Kong. And then your PhD is kind of your first experience in the Canadian system. So I'm wondering what it is like moving between these systems, and what do you find interesting about studying in the Canadian system as well?
Thank you, Colleen. And I think I'll definitely say it's very interesting, and I'm glad I have the privilege to be an international student in both systems, so that I could see what those supports look like in different countries and in different university or college structure. And especially now that we're in COVID and things are different than normal, but it's interesting to see how the reactions and the policy making are different for especially international student population that impacted the most in this pandemic. And I found that a lot of similarities between the US and Canadian system so far, but there's also, I think the very unique part about Canadian higher education is a lot of the school are public university. And so that's very different from the institution I work at. Is called a college, but it's a university standing in the Canadian meaning. So it's always confusing when I talk to my Canadian colleagues and I work at a college, but it's actually a university. It's a liberal arts university. And also the funding structure is different. So even when you're looking at some of the federal money support during the pandemic, there's certain amount of money as a private liberal arts institution, you don't get that, or you can only allocate those money for certain populations. So like seeing how they react to those and how they function within the different regulation has been very interesting as well. And also as a staff and administrator working in a non-union sector in the US and versus like the U of T is a union setting, like how that changed someone's career path, especially as an international person, to have learned from many international students or people that are holding a position at U of T when they were a student and now they are administrators. Like, how do you find ways to get into the union so then you can move your career ahead? Because again, a lot of the school are within the union, so without getting into this system, then you really don't have a start in this sector. And it's very interesting to see a lot of the students, both a master and doctoral level, they actually are international students, especially at OIC, at U of T. So like how their rich culture that brings into that, I think that goes back to the point that Lisa, Chris, and Mara all mentioned, is use your own network. It's not only about the professional network, but use small things like their interaction and discussion in class. And those will be like people you could learn from. You can start small things like collaborate on a paper or a conference presentation or speak at a panel together. Then you could see how those things might be different. And for those that might not have the opportunity to study abroad just yet because of COVID, I think there's a lot of great resources just on campus, not only the international student, but maybe a colleague or a professor that you work with. You'll be surprised that they might have some sort of international collection. A connection that you might want to explore. So that has been very helpful for me to connect those dots and also help myself to identify which area and direction I want to go next. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Susanna. And then kind of a similar question for Mara. So you also have an international background in student affairs. Can you tell us a little bit about how your experiences working in the US and Canada compare and how having that experience kind of helps you in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's probably a lot of differences, and I can only speak about my, limited experience and 2 universities in each of those countries. I think like what I, could target it the most towards is the student population has been different in every single university that I've worked at. And in my head, when, I moved to Canada, I thought that the differences in student affairs wouldn't be that big, but they are. And I think like what I could attest it to potentially is the level of involvement that students have within their university career. Basically, I think in the US, students are very, very involved, and the expectation of student services are really, really high. So I think every professional who works in student affairs in the US is very involved and stay current in the trends and everything like that. And in Canada, I found that students are potentially more focused on their career and and they tend to work mostly. So I think that that was one of the biggest differences I've noticed, that I was putting together student engagement events, though I would say that BD is a little different. And then my attendance was potentially a little bit lower. I had to always sell the experiences a little bit more than in the US, where they were established, students knew what those were. I think the other one would be parents. Parents in the US are extremely involved, and hence like why student affairs professionals have to also be kind of very involved with like privacy laws and like how to work with potentially like difficult student scenarios and things like that. And the last one that I like to mention is unions. Student unions are definitely a thing in Canada. They're not in the US. So I think like me working in student engagement in both countries has been extremely different in Canada, because the student union is separate from the university, and that kind of, it has its benefits and challenges. But all that to say is that there's one book that really helped me make the move between countries, and it's called Supporting Students Globally. I'll put it in the chat. Me as someone who, knew that I was going to have to move out of the United States, I started looking at other countries, and I started looking at who has like knowledge in how student affairs works in these countries. And it was really beneficial for me. I also built a network of international student affairs practitioners at NASPA, and I think it was CACUSS as well. So that was helpful for me. But all that to say is that, I think there's quite a bit of differences, and I'm happy to chat with people who are thinking about that move, but I'll put that book in the chat because it really does speak about the differences between each country. So I thought that was really helpful for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. That'll be really interesting. So thank you for sharing that story. My next question is for Chris, and again, kind of a comparison. So Chris, you've worked in a private college and also in a public institution. You already spoke a little bit, I think, earlier about the not having a lot of resources in the college, if I remember correctly. But how did that differ? Like, what are some of the differences between working in a private college versus a public university that you've noticed?
Oh, I think there's lots, and I think probably Lisa can even speak to the difference between a college system and a small college versus large research university, even polytechnics. Every institution has their own culture and experience and expectation. I have to say this, starting off in a private post-secondary was limiting in my career, because you don't get the same access to the resources that everybody does. And I believe the same thing, similar to what Susanna and Mara were talking about from that international perspective, because you're seen as other, that you don't understand the experience. And so, but I would say that it was a wonderful training ground for me, because when you work at a private post-secondary, I was in meetings with the president, with the vice president of academic, with the registrar, even as a new professional. And I understood the importance and how recruitment then turns into transition and course selection, and the finer interactions between academic choices that we're making, the delivery, and understanding the importance of that registrarial system, the student experience system. And that gave me a real strong understanding of the system of post-secondary. And as I've worked through leadership of even in polytechnics and large research universities, it's amazing when you some of us, when we work in things like academic advising, or when we work in student experience or first year experience, we get really good at that experience, but we don't really understand how we interact with all of those other experiences. And having that has been really, really helpful in my career. And so, but I would say this, is it was until I started reaching out and creating professional contacts with people who did similar work with me in the public sector, that's how my name got known. I think about it when I do hiring for new directors or manager positions, and people coming from those private schools, it's hard for them to articulate an understanding of that post-secondary experience, and they don't have that name cachet of understanding. And so I think it brings a real great richness, but it's really important that you work that network and understanding through. But I think of, when I was in the master's program supervising some of the work that's happening in our private schools is phenomenal. And we don't get to hear about it because we don't think it's transferable. So when I think about graduate work, I think it's really important of us to find those connections with our work, to share that work that we're doing, because we just miss it. There's great work that's happening in some of those private schools. So.
Awesome, thank you. And we are getting near the end here. So I'm just gonna, I had another question, but I'm gonna skip it. We're gonna go to the closing question. So again, this will be a circle one. I'll go in the same order. But just what advice would you give to those who are considering pursuing grad studies, or to those who are kind of in the middle of their programs? Do you have any wisdom you can share from your experiences? Lisa, if you want to go first.
I think the only advice I have is to do it. I think there's so many reasons that we can come up with for not doing something, whether it's, being too busy, and, we all do have, life priorities and balance that's important, but I never really thought going into the program, how much I would get out of it. And so, yeah, I think if anyone's sort of on the fence, talk to different folks and so on. But, if it's, there's never a perfect time to do anything. And so if you're even sort of thinking and considering, I'd, encourage folks to do it. And happy to chat with anybody who's considering and wanting to talk through it overall, especially with some of the especially the program that we did. It was okay to balance school and work, and I ended up finding that the school work helped informed our work, but also vice versa too. Our work was informing our schooling in a lot of ways. So as much as we need balance in our work, I found that it wasn't necessarily about school as one, compartmentalized in, one part of our life and work, that it ended up sort of integrating quite well into our life. And especially if you're looking at a cohort network, I found that the support system that you build or have the opportunity to build, and actually, even if you aren't in a cohort system, finding a way to build the friendships to support one another more in a social and emotional way, I think can be finding ways to make it happen. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Lisa said. And also, I think it's very important from my experience to find a mentor or find someone that you want to start that conversation, because it's never, it doesn't hurt to ask. And if you're not sure, just like I feel like I talk about this to my students all the time, no matter they're looking for a career in student affairs or any other professions. I think it's very important to use the time to reach out and maybe just ask for like a job shadowing, or just have a coffee chat to learn about that one person working in a position you might be interested in. So then you can learn about what a day at their work look like, and then you can get a different perspective about the career or the position you might want to go into. Is that worth it? And having the study to, as Lisa mentioned, like some of the cohort program or even just the general program, a master level, I feel like they're more practical degrees. So you get inspired by your classmates or your professors about some of the ongoing projects too. So that could open up more opportunities for you. Then you might change your course of career during the time as well. So yeah, but feel free to reach out to us if we can be helpful in any way.
Yeah, I guess it's my turn. Couple things. Echo absolutely what everybody is saying. I find many people, they get stuck in not knowing what to start with because they're looking for the perfect program. They're thinking that the specifics of the program matter, and they feel that they're like, oh, I won't be able to do all of that and go to school and do my work and have a family. And the reality is, graduate studies is really about what you put into it, especially at the master's level. You get to take, like, you might be taking about, you know, curriculum design, but you can apply it most often into your specific context, and that's actually what you're encouraged to do. And so it is doable. And like Lisa was saying, you actually, it enhances your work and makes it easier, and vice versa. My only comment I would probably say is about the doctorate level. I would probably say, I had a mentor, going to what Susanna was saying, said something to me a long time ago, which is, it's not the subject matter of their doctorate that got them to where they were. It was the approach and how they solved the problem and how they layered everything together. And so in essence, a master's degree is a master's degree is a master's degree, and so is a doctorate is a doctorate is a doctorate. However, I would probably say from your doctorate level, if you are looking, depending on what you're looking for your career path, make sure you are looking at the doctoral program that you're looking at. I'll give you an example. I have an EdD, and there is still a conversation that is had between people who are the purists in the academic form, who believe that mine is not worth the value of the paper that it is written on, even though it is the exact same requirements as a PhD. However, there are some new doctoral programs out there that do not have new scholarship and new research that's brought to it. And so depending on what type of role that you're looking for, it may remove you from that competition if you don't have a PhD and new scholarship versus the type of education. So what terminal degree. So make sure that what you're looking for, that career path, on what you want to do for what program. It matters a little bit more at the PhD level, at the doctorate level, as compared to the master's level. It's just my comment. Sorry, a little bit longer than it needed to be.
And I think I agree with everything that everyone has said. And if I can say something else, is I would recommend everyone to utilize, either if you're in the middle of your graduate program or you're thinking about it, to utilize that as an opportunity to develop an area of interest that might set you apart for future. So for example, for me, I've been in student engagement for a while. And I can always revert back to like that area of research that I did during my graduate degree if I want to make a career move that is in a slightly different direction. So utilize that as a space to create kind of that area of interest that you have that you might not have the opportunity to engage directly in your current job or in your current experiences. And I think like just in overall, like to think about how you can use that theoretical knowledge to improve the field, because the field is ever changing. And I think like the reason we go to graduate school is to improve ourselves and improve like our practices. And so I think like, how can we contribute to, you know, the field and to, you know, the students that we work with.
Awesome. Thank you to all the panelists. And just in the name of time, it is 2 o'clock or 11 o'clock in Pacific. I want to say thank you to all the panelists for being here and for sharing your stories. It sounds from the chat that you have inspired some of the folks to either kick their masters into high gear and get through the rest of their education. We appreciate so much you being here, and for all the attendees, thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, the panelists have all agreed to have their contact info shared. So if you want to reach out, you can definitely do that. And that is it. So just thank you to everybody.
And I believe there's some good researchers that are actually attending as well.